So did Julian Assange usher in a new era in how citizens access information about their own governments, or is he a careless publicity seeker who's endangered the lives of innocent people? Joining me now to discuss these questions and much more are Peter Van Buren. He's a 24-year veteran Foreign Service officer at the U.S. State Department and author of We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. And Justin Danhof, the General Counsel for the National Center for Public Policy Research. Welcome to you both. Let me start there. Is he a crusader or a threat? And why don't I start with you?
Sure. Well, under the 1917 Espionage Act, I believe that Senator Feinstein and Peter King, Representative King, both agree, both on complete opposite ideological ends of the American political spectrum, both agree that he should be found guilty, at least brought to justice, and face questions in a court about what he has released and why he thinks his First Amendment protections should be trumpeted over the protections of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of the soldiers he put in danger, the civilians he put in danger, the journalists he put in danger, and the national security interests of the United States and those we're trying to protect around the world.
Let me ask you, Peter, your response. Do you agree? Or?
It's interesting that the Espionage Act comes up. Prior to Obama taking office in 2008, the Espionage Act had only been used in the United States 3 times against government officials. The Obama administration has doubled the number of prosecutions and seeks the Espionage Act to use against Bradley Manning and, of course, if they can get their hands on him, Julian Assange. Assange published documents, which is what journalists, what media does. The Pentagon Papers very famously were published by the New York Times, and the Supreme Court made it very clear that the Times' right to publish those superseded any government classification. Every journalist gets information from sources. Those sources provide that information in the interest of an open and fair democracy, an informed public that goes all the way back to the time of Jefferson.
Well, this really kind of is getting at the other side of the coin, which is freedom of the press, freedom of speech. So you feel as though, where do you draw the line, I guess is the question. Where is the border? I mean, people do have a right to know if their government's doing things that are wrong. That's part of the role of journalism, is to expose that.
Sure, and what we have here is an individual who coerced documents out of Bradley Manning from all accounts that we can understand. He didn't just obtain these documents. He tried to obtain the documents to make the West look bad. This was his aim all along. We're talking about somebody who claims to want to highlight corruption.
It was the actions of the West that made themselves look bad, correct? I mean,
well,
he just exposed that.
If you don't do it, it doesn't
exactly.
happen.
If you're doing things by the book, that should be an issue.
Sure. Well, we want to highlight corruption. This is his aim. Well, America has some of the freest press, if not the freest press, in the entire world. So does the United Kingdom, and so does Sweden. The 3 groups who seem to have a problem with Mr. Assange have the freest press probably in the world. And who's helping him? Ecuador. Ecuador does not have a free press. Their president stomps out press that seeks to write against him or speak out against him. So is he really a defender of the oppressed? I don't think so.
Peter?
Picking up on the free press question, I agree with Justin that our country has some of the freest press in the world. And the reason for that is because we as a people remain vigilant to guard those rights. Julian Assange is attempting to bring to light the actions of the Department of State over a period of 10-some years. 250,000 documents that the government said we couldn't see, he helped bring to light. In fact, this has given us a window into the operations of the State Department, a window into the operations of the U.S. government that we as the people not only deserve but require to know. And yes, our free press is very important, and by releasing these documents and making them available, we stand with that free press.
Well, what about perception and reality? And if the perception is you're squeaky clean, but then suddenly the reality comes out and there are issues, I mean, this really kind of opens things up. The American people are able to see things in a much more transparent way. I mean, isn't that important for the American people to have that piece of information? I mean, they're paying the taxes.
Sure, and rights are always a balance. And the right of free speech is what we start with in American law. And when we decide cases, there's a presumption of free speech and freedom of speech. However, when Admiral Mullen comes out and says the information that you provided aid and comfort to the Taliban, to Al-Shabaab, to Hezbollah, over the lives of American soldiers, I think you've crossed the line into damaging their rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, defending our economy, our country, defending freedom around the world. When you're giving aid and comfort to the Taliban, you've crossed over into past free press into espionage against the United States of America.
How would you respond to that?
I agree with it to a point. There are reasons to respect classified information. I spent my career dealing with classified information, and in fact, had read many of the documents on WikiLeaks earlier in my job in part of my work. There's a reason to keep things quiet, and many responsible journalists, in fact, follow that. The New York Times and the Washington Post both have sat on stories that they were told would endanger people. The reality is the WikiLeaks documents were made public over 2 years ago, and Admiral Mullen can make his broad statements, but I don't recall him ever pointing to a specific instance where a specific document has truly endangered anyone. It's easy to make these claims, but I haven't yet seen the government back it up, not in the Bradley Manning trial, not in the media, and not in the United States' veiled attempts to grab Assange.
If he were extradited to the United States, what kind of signal would that send to whistleblowers? You brought up the fact that there's been 6 of these cases with the Espionage Act of 1917. In the whole history of all the administrations prior to that, there'd only been 3. Isn't there a clear signal coming from the Obama administration that we really don't want this stuff to ever get out? No leaks, unless they're leaks that we provide.
The Obama administration has had the audacity in a democracy to bring a reporter from the New York Times to court and claim that he is a witness to a crime because he allegedly received classified information from a government source. This is an attack on a free press. Assange is the canary in the coal mine. He is at the tip of a process by the Obama administration, sadly, to chip away at the free speech rights of American citizens. And it's important to understand that free speech is a two-directional thing. It's not only Assange's right to speak, it's our right to hear what he has to say.
Isn't that a chilling side note of all of this, though, too?
Sure. I would just say that first we're going back to the limitations on free speech. The Supreme Court has clearly defined it, and to say that the Pentagon Papers was a clear case when there was 6 separate opinions in the case is pretty bizarre. It's one of the most complex cases in American legal history.
Though it was ruled in favor of the New York Times, and at the end of the day...
In 6 separate opinions.
Well, that's like being almost pregnant. The Supreme Court made a decision.
Sure, and this case is separate and distinct from that case, and the Supreme Court has limited speech when there's a clear and present danger, as Assange put soldiers in on the field in clear and present danger. Assange outed Afghanis who were helping NATO forces, and the Taliban made credible threats to kill them once Assange outed them. And that is clear and present danger. So the Supreme Court has, over time, put in limits on free speech that are reasonable and most Americans agree with.
An important side note is that early in the WikiLeaks saga, Julian Assange contacted the American Embassy in London and asked to have a meeting to discuss the contents of the documents that he had, and offered to make considered redactions if the State Department were willing to engage with him, and he was told to go pound sand by the American government. So many of these things that Justin correctly raises, we don't want to put individual people's lives in danger, were available to the U.S. government, but they were going after a larger prey.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in and joining us here on The Heat.
Thank you.
Thank you.